welcome to what's episode 9 of our CRICKETher Social Isolation Vodcast. How are we doing this week, Sid?
We're doing okay, I think.
Good. And yet again, whilst from the safety of our own home, we are being transformed or transported to somewhere many miles away. So, where are we? And which England player says that this is their favourite ground? Okay. So we've had a small loosening of the UK lockdown this week, or the England lockdown specifically. I should make that differentiation, it's very important. And one of the things in that regard that relates to cricket is that the government have said that it's now okay for people to use cricket nets and other outdoor facilities. And they've also said in relation to that, that people can open some clubhouses, although it's still very restricted in the sense of you have to have all the communal areas, so the bar and the changing rooms have to be closed. The clubhouses are only really open so that people can go in and get equipment. And there's lots of stuff about kind of disinfecting equipment and things like that. But from a grassroots perspective, there's a little bit of news there. That will be positive to kind of recreational cricketers in the sense of you can now exercise and you can use nets and you can do it with one person outside of your own household as long as you maintain social distancing. So that's a little bit of news. And I guess the other bit of news that relates to some of this trying to emerge from lockdown is that the government have said that professional sportsmen and professional sportswomen can start training again. Again, with lots of kind of steps in place and lots of sort of caution in terms of trying to maintain social distancing between players, and between players and coaches. So the first step is just for players to begin training individually and in a what's been termed a defined performance facility. So that's kind of interesting, and there's been sort of speculation and talk that the England men's team will be returning to training fairly imminently. How do you think that might affect the England women's team, Sid?
Well, at the moment, the England women's team haven't returned to training yet. I don't think the men's team have either. No. I guess the key thing from the perspective of the England women is that although several of them do live in Loughborough where their training facility is, several of them also don't. When those that don't live in Loughborough, when England are training, they're reliant on accommodation at Loughborough. The facilities that they have in Loughborough to put people up in the short term, and until those facilities are made available again, it's going to be not possible for the England squad to all get together. But obviously we are in a situation now where some of them could potentially, those that live near Loughborough could potentially, go down there and train. And in fact, some of them have been able to use some of the facilities at Loughborough in a socially distanced way already through the pandemic. We saw Tammy Beaumont training at Loughborough because she was able to go there and just do that, with her own housemates and things. But at the moment, we're still a long way from being able to sort of put together a full squad training session, even if there was, of course, a coach to take it, because, of course, Lisa Cartley remains in Australia.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And I suppose from the men's perspective, I think what they're saying is that they can go to their particular county ground and use those facilities. And actually that's interesting from the women's perspective because they don't tend to train at the county grounds really.
Yeah, and obviously some of the counties have got better facilities than others, so the people at Sussex may have access to the facilities that they've got for Sussex women, but people at other counties generally won't. So it's going to be a very mixed bag. But at the moment, anyway, the important point is that at the moment the England women are still training at home. We've heard from a couple of the women. We know that they're doing their very best to stay as fit as possible. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult to stay, or it's impossible to stay match fit. When you're in that degree of isolation. However dedicated you are, you can't do that by yourself.
It's partly about motivation as well, isn't it? Because it's trying to keep that kind of psychological motivation when Claire Connors basically said, well, there may well not be any women's cricket this summer at all.
Yeah, it must be tough to be a player and to be thinking, to go out there and try and do your best, knowing that it may all be for nothing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. But yeah, so there are some kind of limited steps being taken to move towards normality. So hopefully that will continue over the coming weeks. The other bit of news that we've had this week, which we published a story on at CRICKETher at the beginning of the week, was about the hosts for the new regional centres of excellence being announced. So essentially it's the 6 KSL regional hosts plus a couple of extras. So there's a new team in London that's going to be hosted by Middlesex, and then this new team in the Midlands that's going to be hosted by a kind of partnership between Worcestershire and Warwickshire county cricket clubs. So any surprises in any of that news, Sid?
Not really any surprises, but it's another important step down the road in order to get to the centres of excellence off the ground. We already kind of knew that some of the KSL names like Western Storm and Loughborough Lightning and Southern Vipers would carry on into the new era. In the guise of centres of excellence. And I actually think there is potentially something interesting there in that these are already brands. They're already marketing entities. They've already got followers and supporters. It'll be interesting to see how many people do come down and carry on supporting the Western Storm and the Southern Vipers, who have been two of the most supported teams. So that's going to be interesting to see. The ECB have kind of. People from the ECB have said to us they're not really going to put in any effort into marketing the Centres of Excellence as an external competition, just because they don't have the resources to do that at the moment. So that they're going to let the competition play out, not behind closed doors formally, but they're not going to go putting out advertisements and trying to sell tickets for it. But it'll still be interesting to see how many people turn up. I wouldn't be surprised if there are more people turning up to Southern Vipers games than turned up to Hampshire games. We'll see.
Be interesting.
Yeah, and then on the Centres of Excellence, Raf, what else have we learned this week about the progress they're making towards their goal of trying to actually set up as cricketing entities?
Yeah, well, the as far as progress goes, the big thing that was meant to be being put in place at the moment and isn't is this recruitment player process. So both, I suppose, for those 40 new domestic professional contracts that were meant to be being issued, but also generally recruiting squads of players to those centres. Outside of the new full-time professionals, there was going to be other players who were also committing to training at these centres year round. So that's kind of stalled, and we know that Claire Connor had a meeting with over Zoom with the domestic players this week, and so she talked to all of them. And in terms of the COE stuff, she did say actually that they were hopeful that the fixtures in September might be able to go ahead as planned. So that's a bit of positive news, although again it's still kind of shrouded in uncertainty, as so much of this is.
And what about the contracts themselves, and the retainers that were talked about when Claire Connor spoke to the press last week?
Yeah, so as far as we are aware, those retainers are going to be coming in June, and players are going to be contacted over the next few days and be made aware, the ones who have been selected for that, which, as we understand it, is a decision that's being made by the regional directors of women's cricket in conjunction with the ECB. And
so there'll be a lot of players this week, waiting under the letterbox for the postman to arrive, jumping up and down excitedly every time.
I think they might be phone.
Postman Pat walks down the drive.
I think they might be called on the phone, Sid, rather than have a letter sent.
They'll probably Zoom them or something, or
carrier pigeon,
house party them, or prepare to be house partied by Claire Connor.
We've also had another interesting snippet of news that's kind of come to our attention about the fact that the idea is that to try and make up for the 100 being cancelled, it's being mooted the possibility that players might be paid to play in the Centre of Excellence fixtures come September. We don't know amounts, we don't know exactly how it will work, but the suggestion is certainly there that there may be a kind of sort of per match payment policy in place, which could be quite interesting actually.
Yeah, because originally it was the idea was that you wouldn't be paid to play in the Centres of Excellence. There would be 40 domestic professionals playing, but our understanding was they wouldn't be getting any extra money for playing matches, and those that weren't one of those 40 wouldn't get paid at all for the matches. So they're now suggesting that there may be some payment coming in. They're hinting at that. That's what we've heard on the grapevine. So that could be interesting. And it could be interesting from the perspective as well as once you've started doing that, it's the sort of thing it's quite difficult to stop doing. You know, once you've said, well, we're going to play players this year, how do you then turn around next year and go, well, actually, we're not going to pay you this year? So things could be evolving there in a interesting way.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, moving on from issues in this country, issues abroad and in the wider world, the ICC have announced that the qualifiers for the World Cup, that's the sort of qualifying tournament for the last few places in the World Cup itself. The World Cup's supposed to be being held at the beginning of next year in New Zealand. A few places still up for grabs. Qualifying tournament was supposed to take place in a couple of months' time. The ICC have made an announcement this week, haven't they, Raf?
They have, yeah. So it was supposed to be happening in July in Sri Lanka, and the ICC have said that it's being postponed, which is...
So just postponed?
Yeah, which is not what we were expecting, to be honest. I think that we all knew that tournament was not going to be able to take place. We were expecting and had talked about in this podcast a few weeks ago that they would cancel it, and that therefore the teams that would qualify would just be, the teams in the World Cup next year would be the top 8 ranked teams in the world as it currently stands. It's a bit of an odd one in a way, because it does seem, as you say, the World Cup is meant to take place in February 2021 in New Zealand. So we're kind of running out of time in a way to hold the qualifying tournament. Teams need to be given enough notice that they're going to be taking part in that tournament. And they need to have time to prepare and to train and to make travel arrangements, etc. So if you're saying that your qualifying tournament in July is going to be postponed indefinitely, we don't know, they haven't said anything about where or when it might take place, then that's, slightly confusing. Does it maybe suggest that, unfortunately, the likelihood is that tournament in New Zealand is going to end up being postponed, in which case you've got a bit more time to play the qualifier?
Yeah, I mean, put you on the spot here, Raf. What's your instinct about that tournament in New Zealand? Do you think it's going to go ahead as scheduled? Yes or no? I have to press you here.
I'll go with yes.
Okay.
And I'm being hopeful here, but I think that partly because it's going to be in New Zealand, they seem to have done things really well over there, and I think that actually, in a way, the women's tournament is more likely to go ahead than the men's T20 World Cup, even if they decide to try and push that back. But it feels to me like what's happening is that the men are very reluctant for their tournament to take place behind closed doors and without crowds, whereas the women would just be happy to crack on. And because, up until very recently, they're used to playing matches with no spectators anyway, so they don't really care. They just want to get back out there and play their tournament. Whereas the men, a bit more egotistical, actually seem really quite concerned. There was this thing that Jofra Archer said a few days ago, it will be really hard to play with no crowds and with no crowd noise, and they need to kind of beam crowd noise into the stadiums if they're going to play, if the England men's team are going to play this summer. And you go, well, what kind of bonkers world are you living in where you can't cope with playing in front of an empty stadium? It feels really strange to me.
The crowd experience of canned laughter, and there's someone that's there to press a cheer button every time someone does something spectacular.
Yeah.
Or maybe 2 buttons, small cheer and big cheer.
So my instinct is perhaps that the women's tournament will go ahead in February, and that maybe the men's tournament might then take a bit longer to get scheduled because they're dealing with those other kind of issues.
Yeah, I mean the problem of how to to reopen professional sport is one that they're dealing with all over the world in all sorts of sports. How do you put on sporting events? presumably initially behind closed doors in the COVID-19 era. And Raf, you sat in on a webinar this week organised by and let's get this right, by BASIS, the British Association of Sustainable Sport. I don't quite know how that acronym works, but that's not important at this stage. You sat in on a webinar about how they might be looking at getting sport back on. What did you learn from that?
Yeah, it was really interesting. They had about 100 people in this webinar from all different sports, working at all levels of sports. There were people working very basic kind of local club level, right up to the people in charge of the big stadia, like the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff, for example. There was somebody from there, somebody from Lords, etc. So yeah, there seems to be a lot of uncertainty, essentially, about how you do this.
It can't be easy. It's not the sort of thing that's just ABC, right?
Well, funny you should say that, Syd. So yeah, there's a company called Rockvolt, whose managing director Pete Watts was in on this meeting, and he's come up with these kind of series of principles which work on the A to E basis. So that's why Syd's making a stupid joke about the alphabet. So the A to E principles are assess, which is what everyone's doing at the moment, trying to work it out. Blueprint, which is actually developing a model that can be rolled out across stadia that different sports can work to and can use. And I guess also would need to be approved by the government when you actually are looking to kind of properly reopen these venues. Then C and D go together, which is clean and disinfect. So obviously your cleaning processes are your ones that you would have had in place probably before COVID, but might have to be a bit more stringent. But then disinfect, because obviously as well as things being clean, you also need things to be virus free. So you've got to think about that. And then the E is probably the trickiest bit, which is evaluate continually. So one of the things that was kind of being talked about in this meeting was actually something that I hadn't even really thought about before, which is that, okay, you can probably say with 99% certainty that you can clean your venue and disinfect your venue, and you can get it to a stage where you can be reasonably confident that it's virus free.
Okay.
You open the gates, the first person walks in, and within 5 minutes you can no longer be sure that your venue is virus free, because that person could be dropping any amount of viral load. And for example, that person goes in and uses a toilet. Okay, they touch the door handle, they touch the toilet, they touch the sink, they leave. That toilet, that whole facility is now no longer clean, no longer virus free. So are you going to have to then clean every toilet after every use? In which case, 10,000 people, 20,000 people in a stadium, like, it's just going to be impossible. They're talking also...
even if you can socially distance those people in terms of spreading them out from seat to seat and go, well, we're only going to occupy one in every 5 seats or something. It still looks like a real challenge.
Well, it's things like that, yeah. And then, very, very basic things like how do you ensure that food is delivered safely? All those kind of... Or waste disposal processes. Those kind of things that venues had... they had these processes in place, and they're now having to rethink every single tiny aspect of their functionality. There was a guy in this meeting that I attended on Wednesday who says he doesn't think that any of these big stadia, will be open to the public for 2 years. He thinks that that's how long it will take.
Wow, that's sobering.
Yeah, he thinks that's how long it will take before they can get back to sort of full business, and it is sobering. And there were other people in the meeting who are more optimistic, but it's a very difficult situation, and it's a very difficult thing to try and get your head around.
Okay, well, so that's that for this week, I think. Thanks for joining us. We'll be in the same place next week, I guess, as.
In the same physical place, but with a different virtual background, though. So isn't that the exciting thing? Don't you think people must really look forward to seeing where we are week on week?
I'm sure they do. So we'll be somewhere else next week, but still here, still there. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.